Iran just launched a missile that broke through every single defense system on Earth. The Patriot failed, the Arrow failed, Iron Dome failed, and Israel is running out of time. Last night changed everything about this war, and most people have no idea what actually happened or what it means for what comes next. Stay with me, because what Iran introduced to this battlefield last night does not just change today's headlines. It changes the fundamental math of who can sustain this war, and for how long. Here is the conflict pair driving everything you are about to hear. On one side, Israel and the United States, running the most intensive air campaign in the Middle East since Desert Storm, publicly declaring victory while privately authorizing emergency midnight spending to replace the defensive shield that is cracking under the weight of 16 days of relentless Iranian fire. On the other side, Iran, a country that has absorbed 6,000 strikes, lost its supreme leader, and watched its military infrastructure reduced to a fraction of what it was on February 28, a country that held its most advanced weapon in reserve for 16 days and chose last night to introduce it for the first time in active combat. The question that every defense analyst, every intelligence agency, and every allied government is asking right now is the one that nobody in any official position wants to answer publicly. What happens when a country that is running critically low on interceptors faces a missile that its interceptors cannot catch? Start with the missile, because most people watching this have never heard the name Sajil before last night, and they need to understand exactly what Iran introduced to this war. The Sajil ballistic missile, nicknamed the dancing missile, is Iran's most advanced homegrown weapon system. It is a two-stage solid-fuel ballistic missile, standing nearly 18 meters tall, carrying a 700-kilogram warhead, with a range of 2,500 kilometers that covers all of Israel, all of Saudi Arabia, all of Turkey, and reaches into Eastern Europe. But the range is not what makes it dangerous. What makes it dangerous is what it does in flight. A traditional ballistic missile follows a predictable arc. It launches, climbs, and descends on a trajectory that radar systems can calculate, track, and intercept. Defense systems work by predicting where a missile will be, not where it is. You fire your interceptor at the point in space where the missile will arrive. That is the entire mathematical foundation of every missile defense system ever built. The Sajil dances. It changes direction mid-flight at speeds between Mach 5 and Mach 10. At Mach 10, the missile is traveling at 12,000 kilometers per hour. By the time a radar system detects a direction change, calculates a new intercept trajectory, and fires a corrected interceptor, the Sajil has already moved past the point the interceptor is heading for. You cannot chase a missile at Mach 10 with a redirect. The physics will not allow it. Now understand why each individual feature of this missile was designed specifically to defeat the systems currently deployed in this theater. The Arrow 3 system, Israel's highest-tier ballistic missile defense, operates by tracking an incoming missile's trajectory, calculating its predicted impact point, and firing an interceptor to meet it in the upper atmosphere. That calculation assumes the missile's trajectory is consistent. When the Sajil changes direction, that calculation becomes worthless. The interceptor is already committed to a flight path that no longer leads to the target. The Patriot PAC-3 system, the backbone of American air defense in this theater, operates on a similar predictive model but at lower altitudes. It is extraordinarily effective against traditional ballistic missiles. Against a missile that maneuvers at hypersonic speed in the terminal phase of its descent, the engagement window shrinks to fractions of a second. The Patriot's radar must detect the direction change, relay that data to the fire control system, recalculate the intercept solution, and retarget, all while the Sajil is covering 3 kilometers every second. At that speed, the difference between a successful intercept and a miss is measured in milliseconds. Iron Dome was designed for a different threat entirely: short-range rockets and artillery shells fired from distances under 70 kilometers. It is extraordinarily effective at what it was built for. It was not built for a maneuvering ballistic missile at Mach 10 descending from the upper atmosphere. Using Iron Dome against the Sajil is like using a fishing net to catch a bullet. And Iran did not stop at maneuverability. The Sajil has been equipped with an anti-radar coating, a material applied to its exterior that absorbs radar waves rather than reflecting them, dramatically reducing the missile's radar cross-section and making it harder to detect from the moment it launches. Solid fuel propulsion means it can be ready to fire within minutes of being positioned, eliminating the preparation window that liquid fuel missiles require and making preemptive strikes on its launch sites nearly impossible to time correctly. Every design choice in the Sajil was made with one objective: to be uncatchable by the systems defending the countries it is targeting. But why did Iran wait 16 days to use this weapon? This is the question that should make every analyst deeply uncomfortable, and the answer is more alarming than the missile itself. On day one of this war, Iran had 3 things it needed to protect: its credible deterrence capability, its negotiating leverage, and its most advanced weapons. It spent the first 16 days burning through its older inventory, the Shaheds, the Feta missiles, the Feta hypersonics, while carefully mapping how Israel and the United States responded. Every interceptor fired in response to an Iranian attack was data. Every gap in coverage that opened when multiple simultaneous attacks overwhelmed the sector's response capacity was intelligence. Every time a Patriot battery exhausted its ready rounds and required reloading time, Iran's targeting computers recorded the window. By day 5, Iran knew the approximate daily depletion rate of Israeli Arrow interceptors. By day 10, it had mapped the coverage gaps that opened when Iran targeted for Gulf states simultaneously and stretched American defense resources thin. By day 14, its intelligence picture of the defensive architecture's weakest points was as complete as it was ever going to be. And on day 16, with the stockpiles at their most depleted and the defensive systems at their most strained, Iran introduced the weapon it had been saving for exactly this moment. That is not desperation. That is 16 days of patient, deliberate intelligence collection followed by a precisely timed escalation. And it is the most alarming strategic signal this war has produced because it means Iran has been managing this conflict with a patience and sophistication that its enemies did not fully anticipate. Now here is the second development, and this is the one that changes the entire strategic picture. Israel informed the United States this week that it is running critically low on ballistic missile interceptors, not running low, critically low. Two words confirmed by U.S. officials to semaphore. Two words that mean the defensive shield standing between Iranian missiles and Israeli cities for 16 days is beginning to crack. Let me put the numbers in front of you so you understand what critically low actually means in practice. Last summer, during 12 days of conflict with Iran, the United States fired over 150 dated interceptors believed to be approximately a quarter of total U.S. data inventory at the time. In the first 5 days of this war alone, the U.S. burned through approximately $2.4 billion worth of Patriot interceptors, and Iran has launched roughly 300 ballistic missiles at Israel in 16 days, a rate of 19 per day, plus hundreds of cluster munitions that split into multiple submunitions mid-flight, each requiring its own intercept assessment plus drones, against a stockpile that was already described as critically low before the first shot was fired. To understand what that depletion means in practice, consider how Israel's layered missile defense architecture actually functions. Iron Dome handles incoming threats at ranges under 70 kilometers, primarily short-range rockets and artillery. David Sling handles medium-range ballistic missiles and cruise missiles that Iron Dome cannot engage. Arrow 2 handles ballistic missiles within the atmosphere at longer ranges. Arrow 3 handles exo-atmospheric intercepts missiles in space before they re-enter the atmosphere. Each tier is the last line of defense for threats that have passed through the tier below it. Each tier has a finite inventory, and each inventory has been depleting every single day for 16 days. The cluster warhead dimension makes this problem significantly worse than the raw missile count suggests. When Iran fires a missile armed with cluster warheads, that single missile splits into dozens of submunitions in its terminal phase. Each submunition triggers its own intercept assessment. Each assessment that recommends engagement depletes the interceptor stockpile further. Iran has been using cluster warheads specifically because it understands the mathematics of depletion. One missile becomes dozens of threats. Dozens of threats become dozens of intercept decisions. Dozens of intercept decisions become dozens of interceptors expended against a stockpile that was already critically low before the shooting started. That mathematics compounds into a crisis. The Israeli government publicly denied the shortage. And then at midnight, while sirens were blaring across the country, the cabinet voted by emergency phone call to authorize $826 million in urgent and essential defense procurement. Emergency midnight phone vote. $826 million for urgent and essential purchases. You do not hold a midnight emergency vote to spend $826 million if your interceptors are not running out. Those two facts cannot coexist. Either the shortage is real and the public denial was false, or the midnight emergency spending was completely unnecessary. There is no version of this story where both statements are accurate. 7 waves of Iranian missile attacks targeted Israel in a single afternoon on March 15th. Multiple impacts were confirmed. Technical problems were taking critical systems offline for maintenance while the war continued without pause. This is what critically low looks like in real time, not a single dramatic failure, but a slow grinding depletion that intercepts less with every passing day as the stockpile shrinks. The maintenance backlog grows, and the maintenance keep coming. And into that depleted, strained, maintenance-pressured defensive architecture, Iran sent the dancing missile for the first time last night. Benjamin Netanyahu, the man who ordered the opening strikes of this war, who stood at a podium on February 28th and declared equal totality, who said he would end the Iranian threat once and for all, that man is now leading a country whose midnight emergency cabinet vote just confirmed what his government publicly denied. The interceptors are running out, the shield is cracking, and the weapon Iran just introduced to this battlefield was specifically engineered to exploit every gap that 16 days of sustained fire has opened in the defensive architecture Netanyahu built his entire war strategy around. For the families in Tel Aviv who heard 7 waves of air raid sirens in a single afternoon on March 15th, for the children pulled from schools into shelters for the 4th time in a week, for the missile defense operators, watching their intercept confirmation rates decline shift by shift as the stockpile depletes, This is not a strategic abstraction. This is the sound of a shield that has been holding for 16 days, beginning to develop the cracks that the dancing missile was designed to find. Now the third development, the one that every American watching this needs to hear completely. The FBI sent an alert to every law enforcement agency in Southern California stating that Iran may have begun planning retaliatory drone strikes on American soil launched from a vessel in the Pacific Ocean against unspecified targets in California. Let that land. Not from Iranian territory, not from a Middle Eastern proxy network. From a ship in the Pacific Ocean. Drones launched from international waters, approaching the California coast, targeting locations that the FBI described only as unspecified. The intelligence behind this warning was gathered in early February 2026, before February 28, before the first American bomb fell on Tehran, before this war existed in any official sense. The United States government had credible intelligence suggesting Iran was planning drone strikes on California soil before it authorized the operation that gave Iran every reason to execute that plan. And it waited until the war was 2 weeks old, 14 days, to send the alert to local law enforcement agencies that would need that intelligence to protect the communities they served. Why did the FBI wait 14 days to warn California? The answer that intelligence officials will not say publicly but that experienced observers understand is this. Releasing the warning earlier would have required explaining why the United States launched a war while possessing intelligence that its enemy intended to bring that war to American soil. That is a political and legal calculation that delayed a security communication that the people of California deserved to receive on day one. The Academy Awards ceremony at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood on the night of March 15th was surrounded by 10,000 security personnel, 1,000 private security officers on site. The LAPD deployed uniformed officers, surveillance cameras, drones, bomb-sniffing dogs, and SWAT teams positioned throughout the surrounding blocks. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department issued a statement saying it was maintaining increased vigilance in light of current global events. The FBI's Los Angeles Bureau confirmed its agents were working alongside the LAPD specifically because of the Iranian drone threat intelligence. 10,000 security officers at a movie awards ceremony in Hollywood because the war that started in Tehran 16 days ago has produced credible intelligence that Iran may be positioning drones off the California coast from a vessel in the Pacific. For the Hollywood production workers who drove past SWAT teams to get to work that night, for the ordinary Los Angeles families who watched the ceremony on television without knowing the FBI was tracking an active Iranian drone threat outside the venue. This war is no longer a distant conflict in a distant region. It arrived on American shores 16 days after the first bomb fell. Now step back and look at the full picture of what all three developments together reveal about where this war actually stands. Iran introduced its most advanced weapon system after 16 days of deliberate intelligence collection and calculated restraint, not from weakness, but from strategy. The Sajil struck its targets. The interceptors failed. The Israeli government voted at midnight to spend emergency funds on replacements that take months to manufacture and weeks to deploy. And the FBI is warning California that drones may be approaching from the Pacific. Trump told NBC News that Iran wants to make a deal, but the terms are not good enough yet. Not we won, not they are totally defeated. The terms are not good enough yet. That is a negotiating frame from a man who understands that the war he declared essentially over in the first hour is still very much unresolved on day 16. But here is why that deal frame is more complicated than it sounds. The man on the other side of that potential negotiation is Mojtaba Khomeini, whose father was killed in the opening strikes of this war, whose first public speech as supreme leader contained 5 explicit military threats and no diplomatic off-ramp, whose military just introduced a dancing missile that no defense system in the region stopped, and whose government told Washington privately that current terms are not acceptable. A man negotiating from grief, from ideology, and from a military position that just improved dramatically with the introduction of a weapon his enemies cannot reliably intercept. 2 sides that both acknowledge a deal is theoretically possible. 2 sides still firing every weapon in their arsenals. 1 side running critically low on the interceptors that have been protecting its cities. 1 side dancing new missiles through the gaps that depletion has opened, and a timeline that is now being measured not in weeks or months but in the number of Sajil strikes the remaining interceptor stockpile can absorb before the shield breaks entirely. The question that has no comfortable answer, the question that every serious analyst, every allied government, and every defense planner is running calculations on right now, is this. How many more Sajil strikes can Israel absorb before the gap between incoming missiles and available interceptors becomes too wide to manage? And when that gap opens completely, when the shield breaks rather than cracks, what does a nuclear-armed nation with exhausted interceptors do with the country that has been raining missiles on its cities for weeks? Nobody in any official position will answer that question publicly, but the dancing missile that flew through Israel's defenses last night is the reason that question now has a timeline attached to it. And that timeline is shorter than anyone in Washington was publicly acknowledging 24 hours ago. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because when Israel's interceptor situation becomes publicly undeniable, when the Sajil's impacts are confirmed in daylight photographs, when the FBI warning produces its next development, When Trump's deal frame produces a response from Tehran, this is the channel that tells you what every piece of it actually means. Tell me in the comments, do you believe Iran is saving its best weapons for a final decisive strike? And do you think Israel can keep its defensive shield intact long enough for a deal to be reached before the interceptors run out completely?